Hi everyone, my name is Rita Everett. I'm the Biosecurity Technical Officer for Sunshine Coast Council with the Feral Animal team. For those that may not know, Council has a team dedicated to managing feral animals here on the Sunshine Coast. And we assist landholders to manage feral animals on their lands. This is our first invasive animal webinar. Please let me introduce Associate Professor Ben Allen and Dr. Matt Gentle. Ben is the Wildlife Management and Research Team Leader at the University of Southern Queensland. And Matt is the Principal Scientist at Department of Agriculture and Fisheries. Please join me in welcoming Ben as he discusses animal welfare versus ethics.
Thank you very much. Sorry for my few minutes late arrival. I don't know if anybody else in Southeast Queensland got this, but we just got hit with a massive storm just 10 minutes ago. And for those of you with a dirt or gravel driveway, you'll sympathise with the massive ruts that end up in your driveway when the little bank of dirt broke through, which is what happened to me. So I was out there getting wet for the last 15 minutes, making sure my driveway didn't disappear down the mountain. Let me share my screen. Here we go, window. So presumably everybody can see that. Give me a thumbs up or say yes or something like that if it's clear.
Yep, got that, Ben.
Okay, cool. So the background to this is most of my research is involved in pest animal management. Dingoes and wild dogs is my bread and butter, but now I work for uni, I get involved in lots of other things around the world. And one of the things that always crops up, whether you're working in a livestock setting or a wildlife setting or anything to do with animals these days, is animal welfare and animal ethics always seems to creep up no matter what we're doing, whether it's a vegan at the barbecue or whether it's a protest at something. Animal ethics and welfare just seems to arise anywhere we deal with animals. So this work comes from many years of sad experience of having to deal with that sort of stuff till we get to the point where we say, all right, we really need to do something about this. So this presentation is around the animal welfare and animal ethics, two different things, and around the principles that we can use to engage in discussions around animal welfare and ethics, but also to evaluate our own practices and things like that. And for most of us who deal with pest animals, this should be very helpful in communicating the kind of work that we do. I'll try and go quick so that we have plenty of time for questions, because I think questions are better than just listening to me talk. I do want to start just by saying that this is not just my invention. There's lots of people around the world that deal with this stuff, and it's very much what I present today is very much the fruit of lots of discussions and scientific work from all sorts of people. Two key people is Jordan Hampton, who's at Murdoch University in Perth, and Chris Bobbier, who's a philosopher in the USA. Those guys have been a part of a lot of this, and they're both really good, but there's plenty of people that are involved in this stuff. It's not just sort of Ben Allen's musings on animal welfare. By way of context, we deal with animal welfare and animal ethics in situations like livestock production and dealing with livestock predation. But we also deal with it in animal production, so beef, cattle, sheep, so on, display when it might be zoos and aquariums and things like that, or even conservation sector when we're trying to protect turtles on a beach or something. But today I'll try and focus my thoughts and focus the discussion on this context of managing predation or pest animal impacts. It could be predation or it could be overgrazing, like kangaroo impacts or feral goats or something. Same sort of issues apply. Two important factors, and one really important thing to remember is that animal welfare is very, very different to animal ethics. People mess that up all the time, and they use the terms interchangeably, but that's not accurate. They really are very different things. Animal welfare is, or should be, objective, quantitative, and it should be about things like, how much does it hurt if I do this? Does it hurt less if I do that? we ask ourselves how we go about things. So if we've got to the point where we're doing some fox control or something, we might say, all right, do we use baits, traps, guns, or harsh language? They're animal welfare related questions about how we go about it. And we really want to get to the point of knowing what are the effects, the welfare effects of our actions or inactions on the animals that we're dealing with. If I use 1080 on a fox, is that better than using a bullet on a fox? Those are animal welfare questions. If we do that right, it should be indisputable or unquestionable, that kind of science. And a good example of an animal welfare issue is trapping. Does trapping hurt more than getting a poison bait or a bullet in the head? Animal ethics, which is completely different, is a subjective science or philosophy. It's not about how we do things. It's about whether or not we do them in the first place. And so animal ethics is an argument, if you like, around whether or not doing something is justified or justifiable, or if it's acceptable or unacceptable. That means that there's about 8 billion different views on the earth about how we should do things. Every culture and country and person's got different ideas around whether or not something's acceptable or not. So ethics is very much fluid and philosophical and can change all the time. And a good example of an animal ethics issue is trophy hunting. Trophy hunting is not about how we do it, what size gun I use, or whether I use a trap or a gun or whatever. Trophy hunting is about whether or not I should kill it in the first place. Once we've decided we're going to kill it, we then move into the realm of welfare, which is how do we kill it? So welfare is about how we do it. Ethics is whether or not we should do it in the first place. Screen move. Okay. Now, I don't expect everybody to read all the detail on this slide. If you want to take a screen grab and look at it later, knock yourself out. But the important thing I want you to take away from this slide is that down the side in the first column, there are, in this case, 7 different ethical philosophies or frameworks. These are different languages, if you like, or ways of thinking about animal ethics. I mentioned 8 billion. Well, here's just 7 ways that people do it. And these are the sort of most common, if you like, ethical frameworks. One that we'd all be sort of loosely familiar with is what we call natural law, or deontology is what's colloquially known as animal rights. What that means is animals have certain rights and humans have certain duties to respect those rights. And a good example is they have a right not to die and we've got a duty not to kill them. That's an animal rights view of the world. Virtue ethics, the second one down, is different to that. It's not about rights or duties. It's about what is morally right or virtuous. And in virtue ethics, they often talk about compassion. It's not compassionate to harm that animal. It's if you're going to, I don't know, euthanize that dog, it's not compassionate to shoot it. You need to take it to the vet and give it an injection. That's way more compassionate. So virtue ethics is about those virtues that we signal. Consequentialism is not about virtues or laws or rights. Consequentialism is about the consequences of the thing. If I have to kill 100 rats on an island to save the 1,000 shorebirds on that island, then the maths just simply tell me it's better to kill 100 to save 1,000 than it is to leave the 100 and lose the 1,000. It's just maths. That's consequentialism. I'm just interested in the consequences, not interested in about the motives of the person, not interested in whether or not it's got rights. I'm just interested in the maths. Most of the systems that we have in Australia and in the Western world, at least, like laws associated with scientific research or how we transport livestock or whatever, most of those laws and systems are set up around consequentialism. It's justifiable to do a little bit of harm, providing the consequences, you know, the benefits outweigh the costs. That's consequentialism. Just quickly on the others, we've got divine command theory, pretty much just says if God says it's okay, then it's okay. Contractarianism, which is a little confusing and we won't really go into it here. Care ethics, which says if we're in a relationship of care with animals, then we've got a responsibility to them. Classic examples are pets. We have a relationship with pets, but I don't have a relationship to an echidna in Alice Springs. And ethical particularism is just a flash way of saying everybody's got their own particular view. But the important thing about this slide is that there's multiple ethical frameworks. Where we run into trouble is when somebody is making an animal rights argument and we are defending it with a consequentialism defense, which animal rights people don't accept. Or if someone's making a virtuous argument, virtue ethics argument, and we're trying to defend it by appealing to God or religion, they don't accept that. So what we need to do is, if someone's making an animal rights-based argument, I need to make an animal rights-based defense. And now we're speaking the same language. To go into a few of these in a bit more detail, these are ones that most of us might be faced with. Compassionate conservation is a bit of a growing move in Australia, to say that it's not compassionate to do pest control. They want to leave the foxes, they want to leave the cane toads, they want to leave the horses in Kosciuszko, they want to leave all the pest animals because it's not compassionate to kill them. They have these core principles as their sort of mantra, and compassionate conservation kind of sucks in a bit of deontology and a bit of virtue ethics as justifications for their philosophy. If we explore deontology in a bit more detail, though, animal rights-based arguments, which is deontology, have two principles, the mini-ride principle and the worse-off principle, which says that the needs of the many override the needs of the few, and it's better to give a little bit of harm to a lot of animals than it is to get a major amount of harm to a few animals. So using an animal rights-based argument, I can say that it's better for those 1,000 shorebirds. Those 1,000 shorebirds are more important to the 100 rats that are there. That's an animal rights-based argument using a mini-ride principle. Or the worse-off principle, a good example is vaccinations. Everybody gets a sharp stab in the arm. That hurts. It's a little bit of harm to a lot of things, but that's better than having a disease run through and cause a lot of harm to a relatively small number of animals. That's an animal rights-based argument. For virtue ethics, there's always exceptions to moral rules. Now, a good virtue might be to not lie. We don't want to lie. Honesty is really, really important. But if I'm hiding Jews in my basement in the Second World War and the Nazis come along and say, do you have Jews in your basement? I can't rest on my virtues and say, yes, I do, and then sleep at night because I've been honest. The virtuous thing to do would be to lie and say, no, I don't. So you've broken that moral rule because it's the more virtuous thing to do. There's exceptions to moral rules. And providing that you're motivated by compassion to minimize harm, like killing my 100 rats on an island is motivated by compassion, well, then I'm acting virtuously. Now, the flip side is if I don't kill those rats and I knowingly allow the 1,000 animals to die, that's being callous or cruel or not virtuous. So that's a virtue-based argument, not a maths or consequentialist-based argument. Traditional conservation, I mentioned, is related to consequentialism. It's pure maths, not interested in rights, not interested in virtues. It's just the cost benefit, and whatever comes out in the right direction, that's the way we act. Now, interestingly, the practical endpoint of all of these ends up the same. My 100 rats on the island die, no matter if I'm following the mini-ride principle for using animal rights, whether I'm following a compassionate conservation principle from virtue ethics, or whether I'm being a consequentialist, which says 100 is better than 1,000. They still get to the end of the rats are going to die. We just don't do a very good job defending ourselves when we're under attack from animal rights or virtue ethics people when we appeal to consequentialism. But it's important to know that they all end up in the same, like the outcome of all of those things ends up the same for most things. What that means is that the disagreement amongst people when we're arguing with a vegan or an animal rights person or whatever, the disagreement usually boils down to the effectiveness of the tool that we're using at minimizing harm, not the effectiveness of, killing the most foxes. That's different. It's the effectiveness of minimizing the harm. So if we think of foxes and turtles up at Mon Repos, the reason why we kill foxes is because we don't want to put the turtles through harm. Well, whether or not something's justified is around, is a particular tool we're using, baiting, guard dogs, whatever, is that tool effective at reducing the harm to turtles? That's what it's really about. It's not about the ethics, the motivations, or the morality of the people involved. Key message from all this. the things I'd like you to take away. Animal ethics and animal welfare are two very different things. It's important to know the difference. And when you're engaging in discussion with someone or you're writing a management plan for someone, it's important to be clear on what that difference is, and important to understand which space you're working in. Are you working in an ethics space, or are you working in a welfare space? It's also important to understand that animal harm and killing things like pest animal control is justifiable under several ethical frameworks, including those ones that we're usually hit up by. So when we're making a case that, oh, you know, it's better for those 1,000 animals, better to kill 100 to save the 1,000, we're making a consequentialist argument. The animal rights people come and say, yeah, but you're not respecting those rights. Well, it's important for you to know that you can make an animal rights-based argument to justify killing those 100 animals. You're on solid ground there. We just don't necessarily know how to articulate it. It's important to know that the endpoint is the same, no matter which one you go through. And as a way forward, what we should be focused on is the welfare effectiveness of the things. Arguments about ethics are just pointless. You can argue about it all day because everyone's got a different view. But where we should be headed is around the welfare side of things. Does this tool produce less harm than that tool? Or does this approach produce less harm than that approach? That's where we should be focused, and not to get confused with the operational side of things. That's all for me. I ran through that very, very quickly, but what I really am hoping for is that people will have some questions and we can engage in a bit of discussion. So feel free to yell them out, or you can pop them in the chat.
Thanks, Ben. Always a pleasure. Just a reminder that we'll be addressing the questions at the end of both of the discussions.
Sorry, I totally forgot that. I totally forgot. My bad.
That's all right. And if people can put them in the Q&A, that would be good. Amy's already started it off. Just a reminder for people, and we can collate them at the end. And please welcome Matt as he discusses wild dog and versus dingo genetics.
You're on mute, Matt.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you. Can everyone see my main screen there? Yep, beauty. Thanks again, Ben. So thanks for the invitation to come along and have a chat today. I thought I'd talk a bit about wild dog genetics in Queensland, some background and some relevance to management. Thank you to my co-authors, including Ben. Look, wild dogs are pretty common, particularly in around peri-urban areas, more rural areas. Most people have heard or seen the impacts of wild dogs. We had a look a few years ago during a research project of ours, what sort of impacts are caused by wild dogs, particularly in around peri-urban areas. We had a look at records from local government, and the following sort of pie chart became apparent that quite a few impacts, pretty much evenly spread between livestock and domestic pets. There's plenty of cases of native fauna being reported about being killed or injured by wild dogs. Importantly, very few reports of disease, even though we do know wild dogs can carry disease. They can cause stress to some people through their impacts, but attacks are very rare. And they can cause other issues such as noise and other disturbances. But effectively, with domestic pets, that's probably one of the more upsetting aspects of wild dogs in these areas. They can injure and kill a variety of our domestic pets. Pet dogs are a classic, but cats, horses, and other sort of small livestock, particularly sheep, even geese, chickens, all etc., can be certainly attacked and injured and killed by wild dogs. So when we talk about wild dogs, what are we talking about? Well, really, they're defined as free-ranging or living dogs without an owner. And if you think about them genetically, they can be comprised of dingoes, which were introduced into Australia, 3,500, 5,000 years ago. or domestic dogs that have gone wild, or hybrids between the two. So effectively, we're dealing with dogs that are free living in the environment. So some of the issues with wild dogs have been quite frustrating for pest managers and people interested in trying to reduce the impacts of pests. Particularly in our peri-urban areas, we didn't know a lot about what sort of dogs we were dealing with. So hence some work that we were involved with and led a few years ago to try and have a look at the genetics of dogs to help build a bigger picture about the source of dogs and help to inform what management could be effective or could not be effective. So in terms of what we're dealing with, well, if we have a look at the morphology or sort of phenology of dogs removed through control campaigns in these environments, I've got 4 sets of dogs there ranging from A, B, C and D. And looking at those, they all look fairly similar. When we test them genetically, we can come up with some results ranging from pure dingoes to 75% dingoes, so it's about 25% domestic dog genetics within those, around to 55% dingo, down to less than half dingo genetics, so mostly domestic dog genetics. I'm not sure about you, but I can't tell any of those apart. And really, the message is it's really impossible to tell the genetics of a wild dog, whether it's dingo or a hybrid, based on their appearance alone. So that prompted us to collect a number of samples from control campaigns throughout Queensland and compare the genetics of those dogs to reference sample domestic dogs and reference sample dingoes provided by the Uni of New South Wales. Our laboratory did the testing based on 17 microsatellite loci as used in previous studies, and the alleles were determined using some gene marker software. And what that allows us to do is to classify each animal into a genotype, basically, and based on a 3Q score, based on the allelic sort of how it ranks in terms of probability. But what that effectively does, it gives us a score which we can use it to categorise the animal into dingo, hybrid, or domestic dog, and the hybrids are varying percentages. But effectively, that's the 3 sort of areas we're interested in. If we looked at results for Queensland, this was done in 2015. Around about a third of dogs that we tested were classified as dingoes. About 2/3 were hybrid dingoes of varying percentages, and only a very, very small proportion, 1%, actually less than 1%, could be classified as domestic dogs. This is similar, pretty much exactly the same as what Danielle Stevens found back in 2011. And interestingly enough, how comparable is it to other states? The Southeast and Australian states typically have less dingoes and more hybrids. As you move further west and further north, you typically get more dingoes and less hybrids. In terms of Southeast Queensland, our results, we had samples from a variety of local government areas. It's worth noting that some local governments, we had relatively few samples, so the sample size is certainly a caveat on the data from each local government. But we had a number of samples from Moreton Shire, so that's probably the best one to look at here. And again, round about just over a third could be classified as dingoes, and mostly hybrid, with a very, very small proportion of domestic dogs. And how this matches up, so if you look at that spatially, well, typically, I probably should have chosen some different colours here, apologies. Effectively, we're dealing with sort of mostly hybrids down towards the border and closer to the city. But as you move sort of further northwest, typically further away from the urban areas, you're generally dealing with less hybrids and more dingoes. But again, a caveat, small sample sizes in some of these shires. And look, and this basically matches up with what Danielle Stevens found. She found, look, within southeastern Australia, where there's been a long history of domestic dogs in the environment with people. There's probably typically more chance of hybridisation, and there's probably more chance of there being hybrids in the wild dog population. Is all this really important? Well, if we have a look at sort of southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales results, there's about 500 dogs here. So it was round about a quarter could be classified as pure dingoes in that sample. About 60% were hybrids of more than half dingo genetics. But effectively, if we have a look at that, we can say that most wild dogs sampled in this area, so almost 90%, have greater than half dingo genetics, right? So what we're dealing with in the environment is dingo-like wild dogs, regardless of the percentage of dingo genetics within them, and very small proportions of domestic dogs. So look, what does all that really mean? Well, we're really interested in the source, I guess, of dogs in the environment. So, and that can give us an idea about how we should best place management resources. So if we place that into a context, looking at comparing a couple of different scenarios. So the first scenario could be that wild dogs are mostly the descendants of domestic dogs. So that means we should really focus around improving our control of domestic and stray dogs, right? If we're getting a source of dogs moving in from the more civilised sort of city areas out into the bush, that's a problem. We should really focus management on that. But if it's the latter, which is they're mostly descendants of dingoes, hence we should really sort of manage the free-ranging dogs as they are. Well, it's sort of pretty apparent that the latter is what's actually happening here, right? Domestic dogs aren't really a source for the wild dog population, and we really should be managing dogs in the environment. I guess that was the main implication we were sort of looking at in terms of peri-urban dogs. In terms of genetics otherwise, how does it really affect their management? Well, it probably doesn't so much, because under legislation, wild dogs, which include dingoes, under the Biosecurity Act, they're a restricted invasive animal. So you cannot give them away, you cannot sell them or release them in the environment. You can't move them or keep them or feed them as well. And there's a general biosecurity obligation. And basically it means landholders have a responsibility to manage the risks posed by wild dogs on their land. So it doesn't matter if they're dingoes, hybrids, or free-living domestic dogs, which there are very few. There's still a legal obligation to manage. However, if we look at unprotected areas, so dingoes are protected as native wildlife under the Nature Conservation Act, or under the Forestry Act, they're protected as forest product on these estates. However, there's no legal protection outside those protected areas, state forests, right? But also within those areas, there's certainly circumstances where parks and forests do undertake dog control, and that's because dogs are causing an impact either on the park to native wildlife or otherwise, or they're part of sort of more coordinated campaigns outside. So there's dog control undertaken there to help mitigate the damage from dogs outside those protected areas. So really we can say that they're managed for their impacts or their location regardless of their genetics rights, because they can still be managed. So dog control can still be done on park estate and forestry estate. Some other interesting things we can do with genetics, which is sort of what we started to play with, was looking at population boundaries. So if we can look at how related different dogs are in the environment, gives us a bit more of an idea about the range of the subpopulation and also what effect management would have in certain areas. But in most of southeast Queensland, we have quite large subpopulations, and management is unlikely to have an effect on the broader population of dogs in those areas. But it's very interesting nevertheless. Also, I could talk a bit more about genetics in general, and there's a case study about how we can apply it to improve management to reduce impacts. So just quickly, I'll talk a bit about a case study we were involved with looking at koala predation on koalas in North Brisbane. So people will probably be familiar with the Petrie to Kippa-Ring rail corridor that was constructed a few years ago. This rail corridor basically went through significant koala habitat, the Pine Rivers population. And as part of the project, Endeavour Veterinary Ecology were contracted to monitor koalas prior, during and post construction of the rail corridor to have a look at impacts of the corridor and the status of the population. So as part of this monitoring, so they captured koalas, they fitted GPS tracking collars, VHF, so radio transmitter anklets and ear tags, so lots of jewellery, and they monitored these animals regularly for their health, for their movements, and for their mortality, unfortunately. And unfortunately, these 3 koalas in this image didn't make it. And unfortunately, a lot of the time when they went to check on koalas, this is the kind of thing they found. Apologise for the image, but this is what does happen. So through their monitoring and their necropsy results, sort of indicated fairly heavy losses due to canids. So from the 503 koalas they monitored over sort of 3 years, a bit over 3 years, over half of them died. And the veterinary assessments suggested that over half of those that died were from dogs. And they also had indications that most of those killed by dogs were actually killed by wild dogs. But it's really difficult to have a look at carcass and be really definitive about what sort of canid did produce or was responsible for that injury or that death. So really, we came along and thought that genetic testing could really help to identify the culprits responsible, and then again, what sort of management should be done to help reduce this. And we were quite concerned about wild dogs, given that we knew, particularly through that area, wild dogs were reasonably common, and some work conducted while Ben was with us show that certainly dogs were in there and moving through some of those sort of corridors in that area, wild dogs. So what we did, so when from a sample of koalas that were killed, we collected either sort of tissue samples, swabs, ear tags like tracking anklets. We stored them in solution where we could extract DNA later on. We also removed tissue samples from wild dogs that were trapped in the area, just to have a look at whether they could match or what was in the area. And basically we had a look at those and used microsatellite profiles to see what sort of genotype, so whether it was a dingo, a domestic dog, or a hybrid, or even a fox, whether we could find any genetic material on the koala remains, whether or not we could find whether there was one dog responsible or whether there were multiple dogs in the area responsible for these deaths, and also to see whether or not wild dogs captured during control campaigns were actually involved in some of these events. So we have a look at our sample of 12 koalas. So the genetic testing came up with, well, it was one koala remains we couldn't actually extract any DNA from, so we won't look at that one. But from the remaining 11, we extracted canine profiles from those. And from 7 of those 11, there was only one canine genotype extracted, so there's only one animal remains genetically on those particular koalas. On the remaining 4, we extracted more than one canine genotype, suggesting there were more than one dog or canid involved with those predation events. Looking at the number of dogs involved, so we can have a look at how many profiles on how many koalas. So we found there were at least 10 unique profiles, suggesting there were at least 10 individual dogs involved in these predation events on these 11 koalas. We also found genetic remains of 5 dogs on multiple koalas, suggesting that some dogs were responsible for killing or being involved in the death of multiple koalas. A couple we couldn't extract genetic material from, so we couldn't really be definitive. But probably the most important question for us was to help us inform management. You know, should we be looking to reduce the possibility of domestic dogs accessing a site, or are we really dealing with wild dogs being responsible for these deaths? And we didn't find any profiles associated with domestic dogs. All profiles were wild dogs. And if you're particularly interested, they came out as being dingo or very strong dingo-like hybrids, not domestic dogs. We also found there were at least multiple, at least 10 individuals responsible, so it wasn't just one particular rogue individual. But unfortunately, we weren't able to match up the profiles from those genetic profiles on those koalas to any animals that were moved through the region. So the implications of this are quite good. It suggests that the veterinary assessments were pretty much spot on. Wild dogs were probably mostly responsible for these predation events, and also confirms that wild dogs are a significant predator of koalas. And again, it reinforces that management should really focus on reducing wild dog impacts rather than the free-ranging domestic pets that could be using some of these areas. And really highlights the importance of verifying the identity of the predator where there's multiple canines are present, right? So we've got wild dogs in there, we've got domestic dogs, and there are also foxes there. So it's really important for us to identify who's responsible for these predation events so management can help to reduce them. And it's a really good approach where we can use genetics to help us identify the identity of the predator, but also whether or not there is one individual or multiple individuals involved. There are multiple predators, multiple species. It can also help us to verify whether we're actually targeting, removing those individuals that are causing the impacts. And over time, it can help us to build a predator profile. So what I mean by that is what type of animal, whether it's a certain sex or an age, is being more responsible or more likely to kill or injure wildlife. So it's a really important thing to do. So in summary, across all of what the material I've presented, it's genetic study. Look, it's really interesting. It's really, really useful. Can identify predators, can determine course of action, which is the main thing we're interested in, wild dogs or domestics. Very interesting scientifically and academically. And really, we understand that wild dogs, they're free-living dogs with dingo-dominant genetics, regardless. We're not dealing with domestic dogs that have left home and are living in the bush. But regardless of all of this, there's still a legislative requirement to manage wild dogs outside of protected areas. So genetics is less important for this particular issue when there's a legislative requirement in place anyway. Thank you. I'll leave it at that. Thank you to our collaborators. Looking forward to any questions or sort of requests for further information. Thank you. Thanks, Rita.
Thank you both. It was great, Matt. I just got a couple of questions here. I believe Ben's already answered one for Tony about whether you see he did a necropsy on a wild dog that he caught and found some fox cubs inside, and whether that is rare or whether it's seen regularly. I know from the research I've done that it's highly possible, especially at the right time of year when fox cubs are around. Yeah, and Ben's answered the next one for Tony. So I'll just read it out so that everyone else can see if they can't access the Q&A. Do you find a difference in why wild dogs kill depending on the level of hybridization? E.g., if hybrids are less than 50%, are they more opportunistic killers or only kill for sustenance? And Ben's response, the short answer is no. There's no difference at the different genotypes, preferential different. Jessie Holt. So Jessie has asked, how do we navigate the inconsistencies between the legislative status of dingoes versus wild dogs as native, non-native? The status of dingoes as iconic/native are arguments for them having an established ecological role, having been here for several thousands of years, often brings up ethical arguments about whether they should be controlled or not. A lot of the time, people seem to have an issue with the idea of killing what they consider native animals in the first place and argue that they are acting as an apex predator in the absence of species that have historically existed but are now absent. Either one of you want to take that one?
I can make a start, and I'm sure Ben will be able to add some really good information as well. I guess, the reason why wild dogs are managed is because they do cause impacts. They're out there, causing a variety of impacts to domestic stock, etc. And there certainly is, as part of the policy of national parks to conserve dingoes on national parks. There's certainly plenty of areas where they're not managed, and populations are extremely sustainable. And even with the more recent genetic studies that suggest that that the proportion of dingoes in our population could be even higher than what we think, suggests that dingo populations sort of aren't at risk, and there's probably less to be concerned about. But as I said, in Queensland there is a legislative requirement to manage wild dogs outside of protected areas, and really it's about managing impacts. There certainly won't be eradication of dogs anytime in the future. So it's about sort of managing impacts, whether that's through lethal or non-lethal means. So that's certainly within the scope of the legislation. So Ben might be able to add a few things as well.
Yeah, I'll just add that some of the things that are raised are kind of red herrings for management. So a good example of that is whether they're native or non-native. That's really got nothing to do with management. It might be a cool academic debate or whatever, but all of the legislation doesn't care about that. All of the legislation considers them native. So native, non-native is somewhat of a distraction to any sort of discussions around whether or not they should be managed. Like Matt said, dingoes are managed for the things they do and where they live. So if you live in this place, then you're public enemy number one. If you live in this place, well, then we're going to look after you. Or if you're doing this thing, then we want to control you. If you're not doing it, well, then we'll leave you alone. So those are the sort of drivers for management, not what their genetics are, not whether or not they're native, not whether or not they control foxes or cats. Like none of those things sort of relate to management. They're kind of distractions in that sense. Varies a little bit from state to state, but not really. Largely consistent from state to state. I'm trying to bounce between the Q&A and the chat that have both got questions in it. I'll try and go a couple. There's one from Jessie around pure dingoes. How do you quantify what makes a pure dingo? And she mentions, I'm not sure if it's a he or a she. Jessie's one of those names. I can't tell if it's a he or a she. But Jessie mentions that, have you thought about the recent research? And then there's a comment from Mel B that says the same sort of thing around more updated genetic testing. Well, that's true, right? As time goes by, methods get better at determining these things. And the results that Matt presented today were based on work that was done a couple of years ago. And it's great to see that, technology gets better and we can refine some of those results as things go on. So I've got nothing critical to say of the new studies. It's great to see some of those things coming out. What is interesting to me from a management point of view is that the new information, what it tends to do is previous stuff might classify dogs into a handful of categories, like 75% and then 75% to 85% or whatever. And if we follow that down the road, we come up with results like most of them are hybrid, very few, or a quarter of them are pure or whatever, the kind of things Matt said today. But when you get new methods involved, it can categorize them into far more categories than just 4 or 5. It can put them into thousands and thousands. So it kind of breaks up that sliding scale from 0 to 100 into thousands of gaps, not 5 gaps. And when we do that, which recent studies have done, it bins them all or categorizes them all into the more dingo or pure dingo bin rather than the hybrid or partly hybrid bin. But from a management point of view, it doesn't really matter because we're not basing management decisions on their genetics. But really actually quite cool from a like genetics point of view. So that's pretty neat.
I can add to that too quickly,
yeah.
Ben. Yeah, look, exactly right. Like our interest was mainly in around, are we dealing with domestic dogs, free living in there, or are they, dingoes or dingo hybrids, and really, as Ben said, with the new methods, they're fantastic. We're looking at whole genome sequencing, etc. It's really exciting stuff. But for the management question we were dealing with, our results are still valid and really applicable. And, it's almost a bit of a red herring in a way, their genetics in terms of management. So
there's not many places, maybe Victoria, but outside Victoria in some settings, there's not really many places that have a management trigger that's got something to do with genetics. It's really not a consideration. When you cut to the chase, if someone's looking down the barrel of a gun and deciding to pull the trigger, their genetics is not making the decision. It's some other thing that's making the decision. But Victoria is probably the closest place that has legislation that relies on genetics a little bit. But you'd have to talk to Victorians to understand their legislation. Reading through the questions, I'm on the Q&A, so I'm just going up. The next one says, are there any plans to protect wild dogs in national parks? My immediate response to that is dingoes in most national parks are protected. Some of them aren't, where they're adjacent to livestock properties and things. Individual parks might get stuck into their dogs or on the boundary of those parks. But by and large, dingoes are pretty protected in most national parks, unless that park is right smack bang in the middle of sheep country or something. But yeah, as a rule of thumb, they're pretty safe in most national parks. I'm scrolling up again. Do you think koala predation seen in that particular environment is primarily a product of that environment? I don't know of any other examples of heavy koala predation by dingoes and wild dogs. I've got some thoughts, Matt, but did you want to respond to that one?
Yeah, look, I think there's certainly been a few other studies where they found that, dog deaths on koalas have been fairly significant. It's likely to vary from environment to environment, like that rail corridor was obviously surrounded by urban areas, and it's, quite a restricted koala population. So it's quite likely that, yes, there is heavy dog predation in there, because of the situation, but there's certainly other examples of dogs being a really significant mortality factor in koala populations. So I'm sure it would vary from place to place and time to time. But, within southeast Queensland, koalas are in trouble.
Yeah.
Dogs are a significant factor in that. So, and habitat loss as well, of course.
When it comes to working out predation risk, if you're trying to say, well, how much of a threat are dogs to koalas? And that's your sort of question you're trying to ask. It can be really context dependent. Sometimes they're completely safe under the right context, and other times they're completely screwed in other contexts. And different pieces of information can be more or less valuable in different circumstances. And what I mean by that is we'll often look at scat results and say, oh, there was only 5% of scats, dingo scats had koalas in it. It must be pretty low. But if you've only got 10 koalas and you've got 50 dingoes in the same spot, well, 5% actually represents a lot. So don't get distracted by little like sort of stats or data or whatever. It's really that whole context. And in southeast Queensland, where it's quite fragmented, you know, number one threat to koalas is tree clearing or having nowhere to live. And that's going on, you know, quite rampantly up and down the coast, which is why they're listed as endangered. As soon as you take away those trees, the next biggest thing is getting eaten when you move from tree to tree. So in those fragmented environments, dogs, including dingoes, can be a real problem, but not necessarily in places of like contiguous forest, where they're a lot safer from predation by any predator. I'm scrolling up again. Kurt's got...
Just stick to the Q&A, Ben. I've copied all the chat questions over.
Oh, okay, great. I'll stick in the Q&A. Kurt's got, is there evidence that management of wild dogs either reduces the populations of wild dogs on landscape level? And if so, are outcomes for native species enhanced? Matt will probably have some more, but in short, yes. People have been looking at this stuff since the 70s. So there's crap loads of studies that have what we refer to as knockdowns. Count the number of dingoes, throw out a bunch of bait, how many are left. There's heaps of that kind of stuff. And wild dog control, when done intensively or whatever, really can knock your dogs right down. But the answer is it can be anywhere from 0 to 100%, depending on how much you get stuck into them. So sometimes you can get rid of 100% of dogs, and then they'll come back 6 or 12 months later if you take your foot off the pedal. And other times, if you do a crap job, it might only reduce them by 10%. So it can be anywhere from 0 to 100%. But yes, there is evidence that dog control can reduce dogs at a landscape level. There is. Outcomes for native species, that's context dependent again, and depends on how much you knock your dogs. So, and depends on the native species you're interested in. So we don't often see like enormous and immediate responses of native species to dog control. So if I was to throw out baits on one day, we don't see more native animals the next day. It doesn't happen quite like that. But there is some good examples from big broad scale programs, like what we see in Western Australia, Southern Arc, Victoria, Bounce Back, South Australia. Queensland doesn't do a lot, but maybe in the sort of central Queensland cluster fence areas, these really big ongoing programs. Again, as a rule of thumb, you do see good responses from native species in those areas, which is why governments do them, because those native species get helped out. But it's not all native species. It's different depending on which one you're looking at. Did you have more to add to that, Matt?
Oh, no, I think you've answered that well, Ben. Thank you.
Yeah, it kind of depends on what you're looking at. And you do see a response if you sort of get stuck into it properly. Same for foxes and cats. Get stuck into it properly, you'll see a response. Tony says, we live in an area where people complain about wild dogs, yet the numbers of people that step up to help is decreasing. How does council encourage more participation in controlling the pest? I'd let council tell you how council can encourage more participation. But what I can tell you from reading, as a bit of a connoisseur of the dingo literature, going back 150 plus years when people started writing stuff, not to criticize councils in any way, but you're kind of on your own. Don't rely on other people to help you out. So if you're in an area where you're worried about dogs, don't rely on your neighbour to help you or your council to help you or the state government to come in and help you. History has shown us that, you know, it's good to work together, and if you can get a whole bunch of people working together, that's great. But if that can't happen, then you've got to look after yourself. And that's kind of what we're seeing in Western Queensland with cluster fences. But they're all kind of similar people. They all raise livestock, but people control predators to greater or lesser extents. And so the advent or, you know, resurrection of cluster fences is really a sign that people are looking after themselves. Now, the government stepped in to help in a lot of cases by subsidising fences, but they're taking their sort of own pest issues into their own hands or taking responsibility for their own pest issues in that way. So if you've got a really good council and they're on it, great. Get involved with council, work with your neighbours, all that stuff. But if it's not really working in your area, then all you're stuck with is looking after yourself. And that might mean fences and guard dogs and all of those sorts of things. Rita has said, are we able to get copies or links to studies? I started to try and copy them across, but there's a bunch. So I think what might work best is Matt and I could probably just send a whole bunch of links to studies and PDFs and things. And if we send them all to Rita, you could combine them in a couple of emails or a Dropbox link or something. And there's oodles of this stuff that we're more than happy to send out. All of the things that I've talked about today and all the stuff that Matt's talked about today is publicly available stuff. So we'll send it to Rita and then Rita can send it out to you guys after this.
Can do.
Rita, do you know if behaviour and ecological function varies with genetics from dingo to hybrid, and is one more likely to predate livestock than the other? Go for it, Matt.
I don't think we have that sort of information, and really we're all dealing with basically similar genetic makeup animals in the environment. So I guess there's an argument about what percentage makes up a dingo or whatever, but in terms of function, I guess they probably all have a similar function or have a similar role, and that could be up to whatever your purpose is. If you're looking at the role of the animal in the environment, or if you're looking at the genetic makeup, it could be different, but I'd probably argue they're similar or the same.
Yeah. If you're asking me what's my best guess or what would be my recommendation or opinion, I don't think there's any difference between a 70% hybrid or a 95% hybrid. They're functionally going to eat the same things, do the same things, hang out at the same clubs, chase the same girls. Like, they're all going to be the same. If I was to put my strict scientific hat on, though, it's actually very difficult to answer that question and to conduct experiments to tease that apart. So it's fair to say in that strict sense that we don't have a lot of data for it, but given everything I know about dogs, I would not expect that to be any different. There might be some quirky little things around animals with more domestic dog ancestry might have the ability to digest bread and starch better than more pure ones or something like that. But I don't think that's going to translate into some functional difference out in the bush. If you've got a hybrid and a purebred next to each other and a little wallaby hops away, it'll be game on, and whoever gets it first will get it. Alex has said there's a fair bit of anecdotal evidence as well as scientific evidence about the effectiveness of donkeys at protecting sheep and goats. Livestock guard dogs have been proven effective in Australia and internationally too. Australia's got 5 million donkeys up north, and they can be successfully retrained to be successful guardians of sheep. Given dingoes are highly effective at suppressing kangaroo numbers and thus reducing overall grazing pressure, is there a reason why this method is not utilised more widely? Seems higher welfare for all animals involved. So on the donkey thing, again, if I put my strict scientific hat on, there really hasn't been a lot of work on the effectiveness of donkeys or guard dogs or whatever compared to things like baiting and shooting and trapping. If you were to divide up all the literature on control tools at reducing predation and what's the proportion of different things that have been investigated, probably something like 90% of it is around baiting, trapping and shooting. And a very small proportion of the literature looks at the efficacy of these other things combined. That's not to disparage any of it. It's just to say that there's really not a lot of empirical work in that space. And I'm not criticizing any of those things. It's just not a lot of data on it. There's more data out of all those other options. There's more information on guardian dogs than there is on anything else. And there's next to none on donkeys. So I'd love people to do more work in that space. It would be really cool. And I'm sure there's a crap load of beef producers up north that would be more than happy for you to take their donkeys and redeploy them down south against foxes and dingoes. I'd love to do that work myself. There's not a lot of appetite for it from funding agencies, but if people are interested, all power to them to do that kind of stuff. Now, on the kangaroo side of things, dogs are very good at controlling kangaroos. And in the right contexts, it's very difficult to find a kangaroo in the presence of healthy dingo populations. And there's lots of beef producers across the country who know that and don't control dingoes for that reason. And I've done work, Matt's done work, there's a lot of people done work in that space to demonstrate that. So I would say it is highly used in that sense. There are a lot of beef producers who value dingoes because of their kangaroo suppressive effects. It's a tool that is used, like dingoes as a positive tool that is used. Probably, I don't know, in beef country, probably like 70-30. You know, most beef producers don't control dogs, or if they do, it's not much. It's certainly not the majority of beef producers that do control dogs. Most are either, what's the word, indifferent to dogs, but there's a good number of them that actively value their dogs. Meg has said, if they were to be rightly recognised as protected animals on private and public land, though, then dingoes, wild dogs would come under the licensing regime, which regulates harm to native animals. This means we would have a better idea of how many dingoes, wild dogs are being harmed or killed, rather than the current situation where we don't know the numbers of harms and kills. Do you think there's value in bringing dingoes into this licensing regime so there's more oversight or accountability to ensure humane methods are employed and non-lethal methods tried first? That's a really good point. You know, if you look at all the native animals, cockatoos, echidnas, koalas, whatever, all sorts of native animals are killed for protecting buildings. Flying foxes to protect fruit farms, kangaroos out west are killed, they're harvested. Like, if you look at the sort of stats on the variety of native animals, cockatoos are killed all over the place for because they damage crops or chew cables, whatever. So dingoes are not unique in that sense. There's heaps of native animals that are killed. Where dingoes are unique is that all those other animals require some sort of permit, whereas dingoes, you're encouraged to do it, you know, through your biosecurity obligation. So dingoes get a special place, if you like to think of it like that. You could bring dingoes back into the tent with all the other native animals and go through a permit process. I'm not opposed to that idea. But what that would do is there would now be a crap load of work on agencies to manage that permit process, given the amount of dog control that happens. So that's actually going to require millions of dollars and loads of staff just to administer that permit process. That's taxpayer money that's got to get spent on that. And I wouldn't guarantee, or I wouldn't assume that that would actually give you better numbers of things and collect better data. It might give you some data, and maybe certainly more than what we kind of get now, but I wouldn't see it as a perfect mechanism to try and get good numbers on stuff. And it's also a separate question to humaneness. You know, it's got nothing to do with humaneness. It's just more an administrative kind of a thing. With my pragmatic hat on, I don't see that happening anytime soon. I mean, cool if it's the case, but I can't see that changing. It took, I don't know, Matt, how long did it take state governments to develop an updated biosecurity policy? Years of preparation. I can't see that getting undone.
It'd be really interesting to know how many animals are removed, whether it's wild dogs, whether it's pigs, whether it's foxes, whether it's feral cats. But I guess the other question we need to find the answer to is how many are there? You know, what proportion are being removed, and then we can have a look at, well, what effect is that likely to have on the population? So, you know, knowing how many removed is sort of one part of the answer. You know, to them, but probably the more important one is what proportion are being removed. So, and without having really good details on population size, it's, you know, both are really tough to collect, but population size is really, really tough to collect. So we'd love to have it, but having the resources to do it's sort of difficult.
I actually think it's not a bad idea, like this suggestion to bring them back. I don't think it's going to happen, but like in an ideal world, I don't have a problem with dingoes being treated the same as a cockatoo or a kangaroo or anything else, you know, administrative issues aside. But at the same time, for all the people that do deal with dingoes and wild dog problems, particularly sheep and goat producers and other sort of producers, that is a big burden on them for something that really does cause them a problem. So I think if you were to bring dingoes back into that tent and go through a permit system, at the same time, you'd probably have to make it a lot easier for those guys to engage in control. because sheep producers really do have a problem with dingoes. You could say, well, you might want to do that as a way of getting less dingo control. You know, if you bring them back into the tent, you're forcing people not to control dingoes. But I think what would happen is what we see in cluster fence spaces, which is I put up a fence around it, eradicate every single one, and then say, I don't have to engage in dingo control anymore. And the reason why you don't have to do it is because you blasted every single one of them. That's not really what we want to encourage either, particularly in cattle country and other places. We don't want to encourage the annihilation of every dog. So I think it's kind of a bit of a balance required. And at the moment, we're sort of stuck with this system. I'm going to scroll up. So Meg, next one is SK. Does the rail study factor in the effects of the habitat destruction of koalas from the rail development and consider this in terms of canid predation? I've given a few, I got some thoughts, but Matt, you'll probably add to that.
I think it is very context specific. You know, it's an isolated population in effect. They are under pressure. So yes, they are potentially more at risk through canid predation. But it does represent, you know, fragmented habitats of koalas in this same situation in other areas of southeastern Queensland and North New South Wales in particular. So I guess it can be representative of those, but it really is a study at that point in time on that population, and that's what it represents. That's interesting nevertheless, and you know, damning for, you know, for those poor koalas in that particular area.
It's a good example. That koala dog story from Moreton Bay is a good example of a much bigger sort of pattern of decline we see with native fauna all across the country. I like to think of it as kind of like this 1-2 punch. You think of the different boxing combinations on how Mike Tyson takes out someone. There's a particular combination of punches you would use to take your opponent out. Well, we often focus on the predator that eats the koala, like the cat or the fox or the dog, but the ability of the cat and fox and dog to take out the prey often, and in this case is true, largely depends on first taking out their habitat. And that habitat can be taken out by fire or grazing or tree clearing for urban development or whatever. So, you know, dingoes live with koalas for a very long time without any issue. But then as soon as you start filling with a habitat, now you've got an issue. So it's that 1-2 punch. Take out the habitat, create a fragmented environment. Now dingoes become a problem, whereas before they might not have been a problem. And that sort of pattern is true for most of the things we've seen go extinct in Australia over the last 200 years. Something takes out habitat, changed fire regimes, rabbits, livestock grazing, water points, introduce livestock grazing. We fiddle with a habitat and then the predators sweep through and clean them all up. So that's a peri-urban example. That dingo koala story is a peri-urban example of that 1-2 punch. Take out the habitat, now predators are a problem. Gregory Reed says, how effective are wild dogs in controlling foxes, rabbits, pigs in Queensland? Again, I've got some thoughts, but Matt, did you want to?
I might leave you go on that one, Ben.
Okay. So very good question. We often hear that dingoes being the top predator can suppress populations of other animals, and that works nice on paper. It's a lovely theory, but we just don't see that in practice. There's a lot of studies that suggest it might happen, but they're all what we call correlative studies. You know, the more birthday parties I have, the more at risk I am of dying of a heart attack. But that's got nothing to do with the number of birthday parties I have. It's a whole bunch of other factors. It's a correlation, not a causation. All of the causal studies or the experiments that have been done in this, and that they've occurred in Northern Territory, Queensland, South Australia. I'm trying to think if any done in New South Wales, but big parts of the country, the short answer is no. We do not see an increase in foxes, rabbits, or pigs in response to getting rid of dogs, nor do we see increases in dogs suppressing foxes, cats, rabbits, or pigs. There's some good work done on pigs in the 90s up around the Roper River region of sort of East Arnhem Land. Dogs had no effect on pigs at all. And there's some great work done on foxes and cats specifically in central Queensland and central Australia. No effect at all. Dingoes have no effect at all on foxes and cats. And rabbits, good luck finding anything that affects rabbits. Dingoes actually, what I would say is ride the wave. Same with foxes and cats. If rabbit populations are booming, the predators are just, rubbing their hands together. That's great news. They're not suppressing them. They'll ride that wave. There's plenty of studies on that. And if you want those, it's outside the scope of the things we talked about today. But if you're interested in that stuff, just email us and could point you in the right direction for that kind of thing. SK asks, given dingoes and koalas have coexisted for hundreds of years and that livestock and domestic pet impacts represent the large majority in the pie chart you represented earlier, should we be managing or killing the dingo, a native animal based predominantly on these two factors? Meaning, should agricultural interests be informing environmental, ecological management of a native species? You want to go for that one, Matt?
Look, it's a tough question. I mean, really, we should be trying to manage impacts, like pest management. Ideal pest management is about managing impacts, so there's lots of things people can do that may not involve lethal control of dingoes or other pests that they can do to reduce the impacts of livestock, domestic pets, etc. And look, and domestic pets are a great example of that. If you don't place them in a situation where they're likely to be exposed to predation or injury through wild animals, regardless what they are, that's great. That's the best possible scenario. So I think there's plenty of things that can be done. As it is, the legislation is quite clear about what's required and what's done. And I might just leave it at that. But Ben, is there something you'd like to add to that?
Best practice wildlife management principles are that it's about the impacts, not the identity of the animal. It's not about dingoes. It's about the dead koalas or the dead sheep. That's the thing we're trying to fix. And if you can fix that issue without killing a whole bunch of dingoes, great. Farmers would be happy if their dingo problems went away. This is why farmers don't control echidnas or magpies, is because they don't cause impacts. It's the impacts that that we should be targeting if you're following those best practice wildlife management principles. Unfortunately, most people mistake impacts for a body count in a lot of cases, and they go, oh, look, I've killed 30 dogs or 50 dogs, or I've put out 500,000 baits or whatever. Those things don't really measure impact. And scientists like myself and Matt would readily criticize people for using that as your metric because it says nothing about impacts. So collectively, we're not perfect on this stuff, but we're always trying to push towards managing impacts. So for a dingo koala story in southeast Queensland, the issue is really how can you stop those koalas getting killed? Personally, I don't care whether it's controlling dingoes, putting fences around domestic dogs, planting more gum trees. It doesn't really matter. But whatever it is you do, you want to make sure that the koalas don't get killed. That's the idea. For that study that Matt talked about, in that case, dingo predation was a very big component of koala mortality, like half. So out of I think something like 200 odd koalas that they tagged during those couple of years, roughly 100 of them were taken by dingoes, not domestic dogs, dingoes, hybrid dingoes. So in that case, wild dogs or dingoes in that spot was a massive part of the impact occurring in that situation. Meg says, has your research or thinking grappled with dingoes as culturally important species? And if so, how this may affect current management practices? It has. I've been fortunate that I've worked in Northern Territory, South Australia, New South Wales, and Queensland, and had the good fortune of working with a whole bunch of different types of people. Some of them are, you know, sheep farmers, cattle farmers, and then lots of Indigenous people working in sort of protected areas and stuff like that. And what's amazing to me is there is such a great diversity of approaches and perspectives on how dingoes are managed. So in some parts of Australia, the dingo control is undertaken almost exclusively by Indigenous people. And in other places, dingoes are highly respected by Indigenous people and they don't want to kill a single one. So, and the same is true for farmers. Some farmers don't want to kill one and some farmers want to kill everyone. So dingoes are culturally important to a lot of people, but not all people. And the legislation is not set up to make it culturally, like cultural value is not a part of the Biosecurity Act. So again, when you get where the rubber hits the road, you're looking down the barrel of that gun, the person pulling the trigger is not deciding to shoot it or not based on its cultural importance. It's deciding based on its impacts or what the legislation tells me to do or something like that. So I just find it, like for me personally, I enjoy the variety of experiences that I get where one day I might be trying to kill every last dingo or make a new poison, and then the very next day we're trying to resuscitate the one animal that, you know, is getting sick and try and save every last one. So being involved in both conservation and control activities is quite intellectually stimulating, and cultural importance is a big part of that in different parts of the country. Do you have thoughts on that, Matt, or how is that related to your stuff?
I was about to say, I know that DES are currently updating their sort of wild dog dingo management policy on park, and I know that that'll be a major consideration is, you know, cultural values of dogs in those areas. Otherwise, look, I'll probably leave it at that. But yeah, I haven't done research on that topic specifically. It's more about trying to reduce impacts of dogs, you know, negative impacts.
Yeah. Mel B inserted a link to a study that looks in the relationship between dingoes and foxes. I just completed a review earlier last year. There's actually 76 papers that specifically address this subject of whether or not dingoes suppress foxes and cats. And what people should understand from the sort of discussion around that whole issue is not every piece of information is as equally valuable as another piece of information. So I try to sort of put it in perspective. If I use koalas as an example, if I went to a national park that was full of eucalyptus trees, and I went to another national park that was full of pine trees, and in the place with pine trees, they baited dingoes, and in the place with eucalyptus, they didn't bait dingoes. And I said to you, there's less koalas in the place with pine trees. It must be because of the baiting. The first thing you'd say to me is, well, it's not the baiting. That place where you baited was full of pine trees, and koalas need eucalyptus trees. So I've now got a confounding effect in my study. We've said it was about the baiting when really our observations of less koalas has got more to do with the habitat, not the baiting. That kind of an issue affects most of the studies in this subject, is habitat-related issues, comparing apples with oranges, not comparing apples with apples. A similar issue relates to season. A good example of that, easy to understand, is reptiles. Everybody knows reptiles hibernate in winter. So if I went to one study site that was baited and I went there in June and I found no reptiles, and I went to another study site that was unbaited where we left dingoes alone and I sampled it in summer and said there was lots of reptiles, I might write a paper that says in the places where we bait, we find no reptiles. But the response to that is, well, that's just because you went there in June. They're all hibernating. And if you'd gone there in summer, you might have found more reptiles. That's a valid criticism. Again, half the papers on this subject have that issue where they've got seasonal issues. And these issues are made worse when people only go to their study site once. They just go there for a week and never come back. They don't monitor the same place year after year over time. And if you put all those things together, habitat issues, seasonal issues, and then only going to these sites once, the vast majority of studies on this subject, coincidentally, all the ones that blame dingoes and dingo control, like the ones that say dingoes cause these effects, unfortunately, they all have these problems with them. Seasonal effects, habitat effects, only going there once, some correlative problem. For the studies that do go to the same site year after year, and they have a place that's baited and non-baited with the same habitat in the same seasons, each of those studies, and there's only 8 of them, unanimously and consistently show that dingoes do not have those effects on foxes and cats. So Mel has put reference to one of the papers that has those same problems I mentioned before, and there are 67 other papers that say the same thing, that dingoes will suppress foxes and cats, but all 68 of those studies suffer from one or more of those issues. And you've got to look to those 8 experimental studies that don't suffer from those issues to give you the reliable data. And those ones just don't show it. I wish it was not true, but because it would be great if dingoes did do these things. Unfortunately, they don't. So we've got to look to some other saviour to deal with our fox and cat problems. That is all the questions I've got in the Q&A. Do I need to flick over to the chat, Rita?
No.
Or...
I've been keeping an eye on that. We did have one guest with their hand up earlier on. I've allowed her microphone. Lynn Watson, did you still have a question? Nope, she's left the conversation.
Okay.
Looks like it's about it.
Well,
thanks. Thank you very much, guys.
The
oh, no, sorry, Lynn.
Someone made the call for last drinks, and now people are putting up their hand.
Lynn has put one in the chat. Ben, read the thought of donkeys that someone brought up. A few farmers have mentioned this regarding wild dogs and predation. It's interesting. Could you put us in contact with one who has had good and interesting experiences over time?
I don't know anyone who's had success with donkeys against wild dogs. That's not to say they're not there. It's just I don't know anyone like that. I would have to ask someone else. The National Wild Dog Facilitator or Coordinator, his name is Greg Mifsud. I know he's talked about people down south that have used donkeys, so I would ask him who the best person would be. And I'm happy to give his email to Rita and she can forward it on, but he'd be a great contact for the people who've dabbled in some of these other things. I just want to say thank you to all the questions, because you guys have asked some really great questions. You've covered some policy and administrative ones, some ecological ones, some applied management ones. So this is an excellent suite of questions from this group. So well done to you guys, because it's been great for me. Good questions.
Thank you both for coming along, and thank you for everyone that's logged in today. We have recorded this, and that we intend to put it up on our website for people to access later on. But you should have all got an email from me reminding you of the webinar. So if you have any questions following this, don't hesitate to contact us. But thank you both for coming along. And yeah, it was great.
No worries. Thank you.
Thank you very much for organising, Rita.
Yeah.
And yeah, certainly appreciate all the questions. It's fantastic with all the interest, and we'll be in touch.
Call or email each of us anytime, and Matt and I will send through a bunch of light reading material for those of you who really want to get into the detail, and Rita can send that out.
Yep, will do. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks. Bye for now.
See ya. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.